I just found out my best friend has been sabotaging every single one of my relationships for the last 8 years. Every guy I thought ghosted me, it was her. She lied, manipulated, and even messaged my boyfriends behind my back, pretending to protect me while making me look desperate and toxic. I caught her red-handed when my new boyfriend showed me the messages she'd been sending him, so I decided to give her a taste of her own medicine. I'm still shaking as I type this. What I discovered 3 days ago has completely shattered my world and made me question everything I thought I knew about friendship, trust, and the person I considered my sister for the past 8 years. My name is Emma, I'm 28 years old, and I've been single for most of my adult life despite desperately wanting a relationship. I always thought I was just unlucky in love, that I picked the wrong guys, or that there was something fundamentally wrong with me that drove men away. My best friend Melissa has been my rock through all of this heartbreak, always there with ice cream and tissues, telling me that the right guy would come along eventually. Turns out Melissa has been the reason I've been single all along. Let me start from the beginning, because this story is so twisted and calculated that I'm still having trouble believing it myself. Melissa and I met during our junior year of college at State University. We were both psychology majors, both from small towns, both trying to figure out who we were in the big city. She was everything I wasn't, confident, outgoing, effortlessly beautiful, with this magnetic personality that drew people to her. I was the quiet, studious type who preferred books to parties. We became inseparable almost immediately. She helped bring me out of my shell, dragged me to parties, taught me how to do my makeup, and basically transformed me from a wallflower into someone who actually had a social life. I was so grateful to have found someone who seemed to genuinely care about me and want the best for me. After graduation, we both stayed in the city and got apartments just a few blocks from each other. We saw each other almost daily, shared everything, and I truly believed she was the best friend I'd ever have. She was the maid of honor at my sister's wedding, the first person I called with good news or bad news, and the only person who knew all my secrets and insecurities. My dating life, however, was a complete disaster from the start. It started senior year with Jake, a guy from my statistics class. We'd been studying together for weeks and I was getting serious butterflies. He was sweet, funny, and actually seemed interested in me. Melissa knew I had a huge crush on him and was always encouraging me to make a move. One night at a party, Jake and I were finally having a real conversation, sitting outside on the porch away from the crowd. We were talking about books, our families, our dreams after graduation. You know, those deep conversations that make you feel like you're really connecting with someone. I was thinking this might finally be it, my first real relationship. Then Melissa appeared, looking absolutely stunning in a red dress I'd never seen before. She sat down next to us and immediately inserted herself into our conversation. Within 20 minutes, she was touching Jake's arm, laughing at everything he said, and basically making it impossible for me to get a word in. I felt awkward and invisible, so I eventually excused myself to go to the bathroom. When I came back, they were gone. I found them inside, dancing together, her body pressed against his as he whispered something in her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. My heart sank, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe they were just dancing as friends. Maybe nothing was happening. The next week, Jake stopped sitting with me in statistics. When I tried to talk to him after class, he was polite but distant. He mumbled something about being busy with his thesis and not having time to study together anymore. I was devastated, but Melissa was right there to comfort me. She told me Jake was probably just intimidated by my intelligence, and that any guy who couldn't handle a smart woman wasn't worth my time. She brought over wine and chocolate, and we had a girls' night where she assured me that I was amazing, and Jake was an idiot. I never suspected that she had anything to do with it. In fact, I was grateful to have such a supportive friend. 2 weeks later, I saw Jake and Melissa making out at another party. When I confronted her about it the next day, she looked genuinely shocked and apologetic. She said it just happened, that she was drunk, and he came on to her, and that she felt terrible about it. She cried and begged for my forgiveness, saying our friendship meant more to her than any guy. I forgave her. I actually felt bad for making her feel guilty about something that was clearly Jake's fault. After all, he was the one who led me on, and then chose her. Looking back now, I realize this was the template for everything that followed. After graduation, my dating life continued to be a series of promising starts that fizzled out in confusing and hurtful ways. Every guy I met seemed interested at first, would ask for my number, maybe go on a date or two, and then would suddenly become distant and eventually disappear entirely. Melissa was always there to analyze what went wrong. She'd dissect every text message, every interaction, and always had theories about why these guys weren't right for me anyway. She was like my personal dating coach and therapist rolled into one. About 6 months after graduation, I started going to this little coffee shop near my apartment every morning before work. There was this cute barista named David who would always smile at me and eventually started writing little jokes on my coffee cup. We'd chat while he made my latte, and I found myself looking forward to seeing him every morning. One day, he wrote his number on my cup along with a note asking if I wanted to grab dinner sometime. I was over the moon. I immediately texted Melissa with a photo of the cup, and she seemed so excited for me. We went on our first date that Friday night, and it was perfect. He was funny, intelligent, easy to talk to, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked for hours over dinner, and when he walked me to my car, he gave me this sweet, gentle kiss that made my knees weak. I was already mentally planning our second date when I got home. Melissa called me the next morning wanting to hear every detail, and I gushed about how amazing David was, and how I thought this might really be something special. She listened to everything and seemed genuinely happy for me. David texted me Sunday afternoon asking if I wanted to meet up that evening for a walk in the park. I was getting ready to leave when Melissa showed up at my apartment in tears. She said she'd had a huge fight with her boyfriend Mark, and needed someone to talk to. She was sobbing and begging me not to leave her alone. As much as I wanted to see David, I couldn't abandon my best friend when she needed me. I texted David to reschedule and spent the evening comforting Melissa and listening to her relationship problems. This happened 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Every time David and I made plans, Melissa would have some crisis that required my immediate attention. A family emergency, a work disaster, a mental health crisis. There was always something urgent that couldn't wait. I started to feel guilty about prioritizing a new guy over my best friend who clearly needed my support. David was understanding at first, but I could tell he was getting frustrated with me constantly having to cancel or reschedule. The final straw came when we were supposed to go to a concert together. I'd been looking forward to it all week, and David had spent a lot of money on the tickets. An hour before he was supposed to pick me up, Melissa called sobbing because she said she thought Mark was cheating on her and she was having a panic attack. I called David and told him I couldn't make it to the concert. He was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Emma, I like you a lot, but I can't be with someone who's not ready to prioritize a relationship. It seems like you're dealing with a lot right now, and maybe this isn't the right time for you to be dating." He wasn't mean about it, but it was clear he was ending things. I was heartbroken, but I also felt like he was right. Maybe I wasn't ready for a relationship relationship if I couldn't even show up consistently? Melissa, meanwhile, worked things out with Mark within a few days, and I never heard about his supposed cheating again. A few months later, I joined a new gym and started taking yoga classes. There was this guy, Michael, in my Wednesday evening class who seemed really nice. He was always friendly, would save me a spot if I was running late, and eventually asked if I wanted to grab a smoothie after class sometime. I was hesitant to start dating again after the David situation, but Melissa encouraged me to give it a shot. She said I shouldn't let one bad experience make me give up on love. Michael and I started hanging out after yoga classes regularly. He was different from the guys I usually went for. More laid back, outdoorsy, into hiking and camping. He was showing me a side of myself I didn't know existed, and I was starting to fall for him. We'd been seeing each other for about a month when he invited me to go hiking with him and some of his friends that weekend. I was excited to meet his friend group and see how I fit in with his social circle. Melissa was visiting her parents that weekend, so I couldn't get her input on what to wear or how to act, which honestly made me a little nervous. I'd become so dependent on her advice for everything dating related. The hike was amazing. His friends were welcoming and fun, and Michael was so sweet and attentive. We held hands on the trail, shared snacks, and I felt like I was finally part of a couple. One of his friends even commented on how cute we were together. When Michael dropped me off that evening, he kissed me goodnight and said he was really glad I'd come. He told me his friends loved me and that he was excited for me to hang out with them more. I was floating on cloud 9. Melissa got back from her parents' house the next day, and I couldn't wait to tell her about the hike and how well things were going with Michael. But when I called her, she sounded weird and distant. She said she'd run into Michael at the grocery store that morning and they'd gotten to talking. According to her, he'd seemed uncomfortable when she mentioned that she was my best friend and had made some comment about how I was a lot more clingy than he'd expected. I was confused because that didn't match his behavior at all from the day before. When I pressed her for details, she said he'd mentioned that I'd been texting him too much and that he was feeling smothered. She said he'd asked her for advice on how to let me down easy because he wasn't ready for something serious. I was devastated and embarrassed. I went back through all my text messages with Michael, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. I didn't think I'd been texting him excessively, but maybe I'd misread the situation entirely. Instead of talking to Michael directly, I started pulling back. I stopped initiating conversations, kept my responses shorter, and declined a few invitations to hang out because I didn't want to seem desperate. Michael noticed the change immediately and asked if everything was okay. I was too embarrassed to tell him what Melissa had said, so I just told him I was busy with work and family stuff. Within 2 weeks, he stopped reaching out entirely. When I ran into him at yoga class, he was polite but distant. Eventually, he stopped coming to Wednesday classes altogether. I was heartbroken and convinced that I'd somehow sabotaged another promising relationship by being too eager or needy. Melissa comforted me and assured me that it was better to find out early that he wasn't serious about me. Over the next few years, this same scenario played out with 3 more guys. Ryan from my book club, Alex who I met at a friend's wedding, and James from my pottery class. With Ryan, Melissa told me she'd overheard him at a coffee shop talking to his friend about how I was not really his type physically and that he was only dating me because I was convenient. I immediately became self-conscious about my appearance and started acting differently around him, which created distance between us until he eventually stopped calling. With Alex, she claimed she'd seen him on a dating app while he was supposedly exclusively seeing me. She showed me what she said was a screenshot of his profile, but something about it seemed off. When I confronted Alex about it, he was genuinely confused and showed me that he deleted all his dating apps weeks earlier. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and I found myself constantly questioning his honesty until our relationship deteriorated. With James, Melissa said she'd heard from a mutual acquaintance that he'd been telling people I was desperate and trying too hard to lock him down after we'd only been dating for a month. I was mortified and started acting more aloof and independent, which James interpreted as disinterest. He told me later that he'd felt like I was pushing him away and wasn't sure what he'd done wrong. Each time the relationships ended, and each time Melissa was there to comfort me and help me analyze what went wrong. She was always so supportive and caring, and I was grateful to have someone who understood how frustrating dating could be. I started to believe that I was just bad at relationships, that there was something about me that drove men away. Maybe I was too intense, too needy, too something. Melissa would always assure me that I was amazing and that the right person would appreciate me for who I was, but privately, I started to wonder if I was meant to be alone. 3 months ago, everything changed when I met Tom at my company's annual charity fundraiser. He worked for one of our partner organizations, and we were introduced by my boss who thought we'd have a lot in common professionally. Tom was different from the other guys I'd dated. He was confident without being arrogant, successful but down to earth, and had this way of making me feel like the most interesting person in the room when we talked. We spent the entire evening together at the fundraiser, talking about everything from work to travel to our favorite books. When the event ended, he asked for my number and suggested we continue our conversation over dinner later that week. I said yes, but I was terrified of repeating the same patterns that had destroyed my previous relationships. I told Melissa about Tom the next day, and she seemed excited for me but also concerned. She reminded me of all my past relationship failures and suggested that maybe I should take things very slowly this time to avoid scaring him off. Our first official date was incredible. Tom picked a restaurant he thought I'd love based on our conversation about my favorite types of food, and he was right. We talked for hours, and there wasn't a single awkward moment. When he walked me to my car, he kissed me goodnight, and it was even better than I'd imagined. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about my romantic future. Tom and I started seeing each other regularly. He was consistent, reliable, and seemed genuinely interested in building something real with me. He remembered details from our conversations, planned thoughtful dates, and introduced me to his friends and coworkers. After 6 weeks, he asked me to be his girlfriend officially, and I said yes. I was falling hard for this man, and for once, it seemed like my feelings were being reciprocated. Melissa's behavior during this time was different. She'd always been so invested in my dating life before, wanting to hear every detail and offering advice on everything from outfit choices to text message responses. But with Tom, she seemed more distant and less enthusiastic. When I'd gush about how amazing he was, she'd make subtle comments about not wanting to see me get hurt again. She'd remind me that all my relationships had started out well before falling apart, and she'd encourage me to keep my expectations realistic. I tried not to let her negativity affect me, but her words stuck in the back of my mind. Was I repeating the same mistakes? Was I setting myself up for another heartbreak? About 2 months into my relationship with Tom, Melissa started making offhand comments that made me uncomfortable. She'd mentioned that she'd seen him around town in situations that seemed slightly suspicious, like at a restaurant with a woman she didn't recognize, or staying late at his office when he told me he was going home. When I'd ask for more details or suggest that there might be innocent explanations explanations. She'd backtrack and say she was probably mistaken, or that she didn't want to cause problems between us. But she'd plant these seeds of doubt that would grow in my mind. One evening, Tom and I were supposed to have dinner at his place. He'd been planning to cook for me all week, and I was looking forward to a quiet, romantic evening together. About an hour before I was supposed to go over there, Melissa called me in tears. She said she'd been driving past Tom's apartment building and had seen him outside talking to a beautiful blonde woman. According to her, they were standing very close together, and the woman had her hand on his arm. She said it looked intimate, and that she was worried he might be cheating on me. My heart dropped into my stomach. I trusted Tom, but Melissa had no reason to lie to me, right? She was my best friend and only wanted to protect me. I called Tom and told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to cancel our dinner plans. He was concerned and offered to come over with soup or medicine, but I told him I just needed to rest. I spent the evening with Melissa instead, analyzing what she'd seen and trying to figure out if there was an innocent explanation. The next day, Tom mentioned that his sister had been in town unexpectedly the night before and had stopped by his apartment to catch up. He said he was disappointed that I'd been sick because he'd really wanted me to meet her. I felt terrible. His sister was the blonde woman Melissa had seen, and I'd missed the opportunity to meet her because I'd let my insecurities get the better of me. I made up an excuse about food poisoning and promised to meet his sister the next time she was in town. This happened several more times over the next few weeks. Melissa would see Tom in situations that seemed questionable. I'd panic and create distance, and then I'd later discover that there was a perfectly innocent explanation for whatever she'd witnessed. I started to wonder if Melissa's judgment was clouded by her concern for me, or if she was seeing threats that weren't actually there. But I didn't want to hurt her feelings by suggesting that she might be wrong, especially when she was clearly just trying to look out for me. Everything came crashing down 3 days ago in the most unexpected way. Tom and I had been dating for almost 3 months, and things were getting serious. We'd started talking about taking a weekend trip together, and he'd even hinted that he wanted me to meet his parents soon. I was happier than I'd been in years. That Tuesday afternoon, I was at work when I got a text from Tom asking if we could talk that evening. Something about the tone seemed serious, and I immediately started panicking that he was going to break up with me. I called Melissa during my lunch break, and she was surprisingly calm about the situation. She said that maybe Tom was ready to take the next step in our relationship and wanted to have a serious conversation about our future. For once, she was being optimistic and encouraging, but I had this nagging feeling that something was wrong. Tom had seemed distant for the past few days, and I couldn't shake the worry that I'd done something to push him away. I decided to surprise him by bringing dinner to his apartment before he had a chance to start whatever serious conversation he wanted to have. I thought that if I showed up with his favorite takeout and we had a nice evening together, maybe I could prevent whatever bad news he might be planning to deliver. I used the spare key he'd given me the week before and let myself into his apartment around 6 p.m. I was arranging the food in his kitchen when I heard voices coming from his bedroom. Tom was on a phone call, and I could hear him talking to someone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but his voice was carrying, and I couldn't help but overhear parts of the conversation. What I heard made my blood run cold. "I don't know, Melissa, this is getting really weird," Tom was saying. "I care about Emma a lot, but the things you're telling me about her are making me question everything." My heart stopped. Tom was talking to Melissa? When had they even met? Why was he calling her? I crept closer to the bedroom door, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. "I believe you that you're just looking out for her," Tom continued, "but some of the stuff you're saying doesn't match the person I've gotten to know. Are you sure she said those things about my sister? Because that doesn't sound like Emma at all." I could hear Melissa's voice through the phone, but couldn't make out her exact words. Whatever she was saying, Tom didn't sound convinced. "Look, I was planning to talk to her tonight about some of this stuff, but I think I should just ask her directly instead of going through you. If she's really as possessive and manipulative as you're claiming, I'd rather see it for myself than take someone else's word for it." Possessive and manipulative? What had Melissa been telling him about me? I heard Tom moving around in the bedroom, and I quickly rushed back to the kitchen, trying to look busy with the takeout containers. A few minutes later, he emerged looking stressed and distracted. "Hey, babe," he said, seeming surprised to see me. "I didn't know you were coming over." "I wanted to surprise you with dinner," I said, studying his face. "Is everything okay? You look upset." He was quiet for a moment, clearly debating how much to tell me. Finally, he sighed and said, "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." I was stunned, but I nodded. "Your friend Melissa has been contacting me," he said. "She's been telling me things about you that don't match the person I've gotten to know, and I'm really confused." "What kind of things?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Tom ran his hands through his hair. "She's been saying that you've been talking to her about how you think I'm not good enough for you, that you're only dating me until something better comes along. She said you made fun of my job and my apartment when you were talking to her. She also told me that you said some pretty harsh things about my sister after I mentioned her." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Tom, I would never say any of those things. I love your job. I think your apartment is great, and I was disappointed that I missed meeting your sister, not critical of her." "That's what I thought," he said, looking relieved. "But Melissa seemed so concerned about you, and she said she was worried that you were going to break my heart. She had all these specific details about conversations you two supposedly had. When has she been contacting you?" I asked. "And how did she even get your number?" Tom looked uncomfortable. "She friended me on Facebook about a month ago, said she wanted to get to know the guy who was making her best friend so happy. At first it seemed sweet that your friend cared enough to reach out. Then she started messaging me, just casual stuff about how happy you seemed and how glad she was that you'd found someone. But over the past few weeks, the messages have gotten weird. She's been telling me all these things you supposedly said, and warning me that you have a pattern of getting bored with guys and breaking their hearts." I felt sick. All those times Melissa had seemed less enthusiastic about Tom, all her warnings about keeping my expectations realistic. She'd been actively working to undermine my relationship. "Tom, I need you to know that I have never said any of those things to Melissa or anyone else. I don't know why she would tell you that, but it's not true." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it instead of just taking her word for it. But Emma, this is really concerning. Why would your best friend try to sabotage your relationship?" I didn't have an answer for him because I couldn't understand it myself. "Why would Melissa do this to me? Can you show me the messages she sent you?" I asked. Tom hesitated, then got his phone and pulled up his Facebook messages. What I saw there made me feel like I was going to be sick. Melissa had been messaging Tom for weeks, gradually escalating from friendly introductions to expressing concern about my intentions. She'd told him that I'd called him boring, that I'd said his apartment was too small, that I was embarrassed to introduce him to my other friends. She'd claimed that I'd made fun of his career choice and said I was only dating him because I was lonely. None of it was true. I'd never said any of those things to anyone, let alone to Melissa. If anything, I'd been gushing about how amazing Tom was every time we talked, but the messages were so detailed and specific that I could see how Tom might have believed them, especially coming from someone who claimed to be my best friend and to have my best interests at heart. I don't understand, I whispered, scrolling through message after message of lies about me. Why would she do this? That's when everything clicked into place. The pattern that had been destroying my relationships for years suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't that I was bad at dating or that I chose the wrong guys. It was Melissa. It had always been Melissa. I stayed up all night that Tuesday, going through years of memories and re-examining every relationship that had failed. With Tom's revelation fresh in my mind, I could finally see Melissa's manipulation for what it was. Jake in college. I'd trusted Melissa's version of events, but now I realized she'd probably pursued him deliberately after seeing how much I liked him. The accidental hookup had been calculated. David the barista. All those emergencies that required me to cancel dates had been perfectly timed to make me look unreliable and uninterested. I'd prioritized her crises over my relationship, and she'd known exactly how to manipulate my guilt and loyalty. Michael from yoga. She'd never run into him at the grocery store. She'd probably sought him out and planted seeds of doubt about my intentions, just like she'd done with Tom. When I'd started pulling back based on her lies, it had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Ryan, Alex, and James. All the information she'd shared about what they'd supposedly said or done had probably been fabricated. I'd damaged those relationships myself by acting on false information, creating the exact outcomes she'd predicted. For 8 years, Melissa had been systematically sabotaging my love life while positioning herself as my supportive best friend. She'd been the one creating the problems and then comforting me when the relationships inevitably failed. But why? What could she possibly gain from keeping me single and miserable? Wednesday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Melissa's apartment. I needed to confront her, but I also needed to be smart about it. If she'd been manipulating me for this long, she was clearly skilled at deception and would probably try to gaslight me if I confronted her directly. Instead, I decided to test her. I was going to tell her about Tom's conversation with me, but leave out the part about him showing me the Facebook messages. I wanted to see what she would say, how she would try to explain or justify her behavior. Melissa seemed surprised but pleased to see me when she answered the door. Emma, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at work? I needed to talk to you, I said. Something happened with Tom yesterday. Her eyes lit up with interest, and I could see her trying to hide her excitement. Oh no, what happened? Did you guys have a fight? Not exactly, I said, watching her face carefully. He told me that you've been messaging him on Facebook. For just a split second, I saw panic flicker across her features before she composed herself. Oh, that, she said, waving her hand dismissively. I just wanted to get to know him better since you're so serious about him. I hope that's okay. He said you've been telling him things about me, I continued. Things that aren't true. Melissa's expression shifted to one of concern and confusion. What do you mean? I've only told him good things about you. Tom said you told him that I called him boring and that I'm embarrassed to introduce him to my friends. She looked shocked. Emma, I would never say anything like that. Are you sure he understood what I was saying? Maybe there was some kind of miscommunication. Even now, faced with being caught in her lies, she was trying to manipulate the situation. She was suggesting that Tom had misunderstood her, rather than admitting to what she'd done. Melissa, he showed me the messages, I said quietly. The color drained from her face, and for a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then, her expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and almost cruel. So what if I did? She said, her voice completely different from the sweet, caring tone she usually used with me. Someone needs to protect you from making another mistake. Protect me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You've been lying to him about me. I've been saving you from another heartbreak, she snapped. Do you really think Tom is going to stick around? You're not exactly known for your successful relationships, Emma. I was doing you a favor by ending it before he could hurt you. The only reason my relationships don't work out is because you sabotage them, I yelled, all the pieces finally falling into place. You've been doing this for years, haven't you? Every guy I've dated, every relationship that's failed, you've been behind all of it. Melissa laughed and the sound was bitter and cold. You're being paranoid. Not everything is about you, Emma, but I could see the truth in her eyes. She wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. Why? I whispered. Why would you do this to me? I thought you were my best friend. Because you're pathetic, she said, and her words hit me like a physical blow. You're needy and desperate, and you throw yourself at any guy who shows you the slightest bit of attention. Do you know how exhausting it is being your friend? Always having to comfort you when another relationship fails? Always having to listen to you whine about being alone? I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. This person standing in front of me saying these horrible things was supposed to be my best friend. If you hate me so much, why have you stayed friends with me for 8 years? I asked. She shrugged. Because you make me feel good about myself. You're so desperate for love and approval that you make me look like a catch by comparison. And honestly, it's been kind of fun watching you fail over and over again while thinking you're just unlucky. The cruelty in her voice was like nothing I'd ever heard before. This wasn't the Melissa I thought I knew. This was someone who had been enjoying my pain, who had been deliberately causing it for years. You're sick, I said, backing toward the door. You're a sick, twisted person and I never want to see you again. Fine by me, she called after me as I left. But don't come crying to me when Tom dumps you like all the others did. You'll be alone again within a month, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. I drove home shaking, barely able to see through my tears. 8 years of friendship, 8 years of trust, and it had all been a lie. Melissa had never been my friend. She'd been my enemy, disguised as someone who cared about me. I called Tom as soon as I got home and told him everything. He was horrified by what Melissa had said to me, and incredibly apologetic for believing any of her lies, even temporarily. I should have trusted you from the beginning, he said. I'm so sorry that I let her get in my head at all. It's not your fault, I told him. She's been perfecting this manipulation for years. She knew exactly how to seem believable. Tom came over that evening, and we spent hours talking about everything Melissa had done and how it had affected my previous relationships. He helped me see that none of those failed relationships had been my fault. They'd all been casualties of Melissa's systematic sabotage. The The thing that gets me, Tom said, is that she was supposed to be your best friend. The person who should have been rooting for your happiness was actively working against it. That night, I blocked Melissa on all social media platforms and deleted her number from my phone. I also reached out to a few mutual friends to let them know that our friendship was over and why. I didn't want to create drama, but I also didn't want Melissa to be able to spread lies about why we'd stopped talking. The response from our friend group has been mixed. Some people were shocked and immediately supportive. Others seemed skeptical and suggested that maybe there had been some kind of misunderstanding. A few friends told me they'd always thought something was off about Melissa's behavior but hadn't wanted to say anything. My sister was furious when I told her what had happened. She'd never particularly liked Melissa and said she'd always gotten a weird vibe from her, especially around guys. She felt terrible that I'd been dealing with this manipulation for so long without realizing what was happening. My parents were supportive but concerned. They kept asking if I was sure about what I'd discovered, which was frustrating but understandable. It's hard for people to believe that someone could be that calculated and cruel, especially to someone they claim to love. It's been 3 months now since I discovered the truth about Melissa, and I'm still processing everything. Some days I feel angry and betrayed. Other days I feel stupid for not seeing through her manipulations sooner. Tom has been incredibly patient and understanding throughout this whole process. Instead of running away from the drama and complications, he stuck by my side and helped me work through the emotional fallout. Having his support has meant everything to me. We're still together and stronger than ever. Without Melissa's interference, our relationship has been able to develop naturally and honestly. We've talked about everything: our fears, our past experiences, our hopes for the future. For the first time in my adult life, I'm in a relationship that feels genuine and uncomplicated. About a month after the confrontation with Melissa, I made a decision that scared me but felt necessary. I decided to reach out to some of my ex-boyfriends to apologize for my behavior and to see if I could get closure on those failed relationships. I started with Michael from the yoga class because his ending had always bothered me the most. He'd seemed so genuine and confused when things fell apart between us, and I wanted to know what had really happened from his perspective. I found him on Instagram and sent him a message explaining that I'd discovered my friend had been interfering in my relationships and that I wanted to apologize for how things had ended between us. I wasn't expecting a response, but he wrote back within a few hours. His message was eye-opening and heartbreaking. He told me that he'd been really falling for me and had been confused when I'd suddenly become distant and cold. He said he'd tried to figure out what he'd done wrong, but had never been able to understand what had changed. I kept thinking about our hiking day and how perfect everything had felt, he wrote. Then it was like you became a different person overnight. I figured I'd misread the situation or moved too fast, but I never understood what happened. When I told him about Melissa's lies about him wanting space and feeling smothered, he was shocked. He said he'd never spoken to anyone fitting her description and had definitely never said any of those things about me. Emma, I was planning to ask you to be my girlfriend that week, he admitted. I'd even bought tickets to this concert I thought you'd love. When you started pulling away, I was devastated. Reading his message, I felt this overwhelming sadness for what we both lost because of Melissa's manipulation. We'd been on the verge of something real, and she destroyed it with her lies. Michael and I exchanged a few more messages, and while we both agreed that too much time had passed to try to rekindle anything romantic, it was healing to finally understand what had really happened between us. I also reached out to David, the barista. His response was shorter, but equally revealing. He said he'd been really disappointed when I kept canceling our plans, and had eventually assumed I wasn't actually interested in dating him. He'd moved to a different city for work about a year after we'd stopped seeing each other, but he remembered our brief time together fondly. You seem so genuine and interesting, he wrote. I was bummed when it didn't work out, but I figured you were probably just being polite when you said yes to that first date. These conversations were painful, but necessary. They confirmed what I'd suspected, that my relationships had been failing not because of anything inherently wrong with me, but because Melissa had been systematically undermining them. As word spread through our social circle about what had happened between Melissa and me, several people came forward with information that made the scope of her manipulation even clearer. My friend Jessica, who had been in our extended friend group for years, told me that Melissa had often made subtle negative comments about my relationships when I wasn't around. She'd never said anything directly damaging, but she'd plant seeds of doubt about whether my boyfriends were really serious about me or whether I was reading too much into their interest. She had this way of making it seem like she was just being realistic or protective, Jessica explained. Like when you were dating Alex, she kept mentioning how she'd seen him checking out other women when you weren't looking. Nothing I could really call her out on, but it made me question whether he was as into you as you thought. Another friend, Marcus, told me something even more disturbing. He said that at a party about 2 years ago, Melissa had approached him and suggested that maybe he should ask me out because I was desperate for male attention and would probably say yes to anyone who showed interest. It felt weird and kind of mean-spirited, Marcus said, like she was treating you as some kind of charity case. I told her I didn't think of you that way and that she should have more respect for her supposed best friend. The more these stories came out, the clearer it became that Melissa's sabotage hadn't been limited to just the romantic relationships I knew about. She'd been working to undermine my reputation and self-esteem in ways I'd never even realized. About 6 weeks after our confrontation, Melissa launched what I can only describe as a smear campaign against me. She started telling people in our social circle that I'd turned on her because she'd tried to warn me about Tom's supposed red flags. According to the version she was spreading, she discovered that Tom was a player who had been talking to multiple women, and when she'd tried to protect me by telling me about it, I'd accused her of lying and ended our friendship. Some people who didn't know the full story began to question whether I'd overreacted or misunderstood Melissa's intentions. A few mutual acquaintances even reached out to suggest that maybe I should give her another chance and try to work things out. This was incredibly frustrating because it showed how skilled Melissa was at manipulation. Even after being caught in her lies, she was still able to spin the narrative in a way that made her look like the victim, and me look like the unstable, paranoid friend. Tom was furious when he heard about the stories she was spreading. He offered to speak to anyone who would listen about what had really happened and show them the Facebook messages she'd sent him. I'm not going to let her destroy your reputation the way she destroyed your relationships, he said. Fortunately, most of our close friends saw through Melissa's lies, especially once Tom corroborated my version of events with evidence. The people who mattered most stood by me, and I realized that anyone who chose to believe her version without asking for my side probably wasn't worth keeping as a friend anyway. About 2 months after everything came to light, I decided to start seeing a therapist. I wanted to understand how I'd been so blind to Melissa's manipulation for so long and to make sure I didn't fall into similar patterns in the future. Dr. Sarah, yes, another Sarah, the irony wasn't lost on me, was incredibly helpful in helping me process what had happened. She explained that people like Melissa are often very skilled at identifying and exploiting others' insecurities and vulnerabilities. You were young when you met her, still figuring out who you were and how to navigate relationships relationships, she explained. She positioned herself as an expert and authority figure in your life, and then used that position to control and manipulate you. Dr. Sarah helped me see that my trusting nature and loyalty weren't character flaws, even though they'd been exploited. She also helped me work through the complex emotions I was feeling. Not just anger at Melissa, but grief for the friendship I thought I'd had and shame at having been deceived for so long. It's important to remember that this wasn't your fault, she reminded me repeatedly. Melissa's behavior was calculated and predatory. The fact that you trusted your supposed best friend doesn't make you naive. It makes you human. Through therapy, I also started to understand some of the patterns in my past relationships that had made me vulnerable to Melissa's interference. I'd been so insecure about my worth as a partner that I'd been quick to believe negative information about myself or my relationships. When someone tells you that a guy doesn't really like you or that you're being too clingy and you immediately believe them without question, that suggests some underlying self-esteem issues, Dr. Sarah pointed out. She was right. I'd been so convinced that I was somehow defective or unlovable that I'd been primed to accept any explanation for why my relationships were failing, even when those explanations came from someone who supposedly cared about me. As I worked through everything in therapy, I started to see some troubling patterns in Melissa's behavior that went beyond just sabotaging my romantic relationships. Looking back, I realized that she'd often been subtly competitive with me in other areas of life too. When I'd gotten a promotion at work, she'd made comments about how I was probably going to become a workaholic and lose sight of what was really important. When I'd started taking art classes and discovered a talent for painting, she'd suggested that I was going through a phase and would probably lose interest soon. She'd never been outright discouraging, but she'd had a way of diminishing my accomplishments and making me question my decisions. I'd internalized a lot of her subtle criticisms without even realizing it. Dr. Sarah called this covert narcissism, a pattern of behavior where someone maintains a caring, helpful exterior while actually working to undermine and control the people around them. People like this often target individuals who are kind, trusting, and somewhat insecure, she explained. They present themselves as indispensable friends or advisors while actually working to keep their victims dependent and isolated. This description fit Melissa perfectly. She'd made herself seem essential to my life while actually working to ensure that I didn't have other sources of support or validation. It's been 8 months now since I discovered the truth about Melissa, and my life has changed dramatically. My relationship with Tom continues to grow stronger every day. Without the constant undercurrent of anxiety and self-doubt that Melissa had been fostering, I've been able to relax and be myself in the relationship. Tom and I have talked about moving in together, and for the first time in my life, I'm not second-guessing whether I'm moving too fast or reading too much into his interest. I trust his words and actions because I no longer have someone whispering poison in my ear about his supposed hidden motives. I've also been working on rebuilding my self-confidence and learning to trust my own judgment. It's been harder than I expected. After years of having Melissa as my primary advisor on everything from career decisions to outfit choices, I've had to relearn how to make decisions independently. But it's also been liberating. I've discovered that I actually have pretty good instincts when I trust them. I've made some new friends through Tom's social circle and my art classes, and I've been more selective about the people I let into my inner circle. I've also reconnected with some old friends that I drifted away from during my years with Melissa. Several of them admitted that they'd never liked her and had felt uncomfortable around her, but hadn't wanted to interfere in my friendship. She always seemed to be watching and judging everything, my college friend Amy told me, like she was taking notes on everyone's weaknesses. It made me not want to be around her, which meant I ended up seeing less of you too. This was another painful realization, that Melissa's presence in my life had actually isolated me from other potential friends and support systems. She'd been my primary social connection for so long that I'd let other relationships fade. About 4 months ago, Tom suggested that we should consider reporting Melissa's behavior to the police. He was concerned that what she'd done might constitute harassment or fraud, and he wanted to make sure she couldn't do the same thing to other people. I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in harassment cases, but unfortunately, there wasn't much legal recourse available. Melissa hadn't threatened me physically, hadn't stolen money or property, and most of her manipulation had been psychological rather than criminal. What she did was morally reprehensible and emotionally damaging, the lawyer explained, but it's not technically illegal to lie to someone about their relationships or to manipulate them psychologically. The lawyer did suggest that if Melissa had cost me money through the dates I'd missed or relationships that might have led to financial stability, there might be grounds for a civil suit, but the damages would be difficult to prove and probably not worth the cost and emotional toll of litigation. In the end, I decided that the best revenge was living well and moving on with my life. I didn't want to give Melissa any more of my time or energy, even in the context of legal proceedings. This experience has taught me some hard but valuable lessons about friendship, trust, and self-worth. First, I've learned to trust my own instincts more, and to be wary of people who seem to have an opinion about every aspect of my life. A real friend supports your happiness and celebrates your successes, rather than constantly finding reasons to worry or criticize. Second, I've realized the importance of maintaining multiple sources of support and advice. Having Melissa as my primary confidant and advisor made me vulnerable to her manipulation. Now I have several close friends and family members I can turn to for different perspectives. Third, I've learned that someone's behavior toward others is often a better indicator of their character than how they treat you personally. Melissa had always been sweet and supportive to me directly, but looking back, I can see that she was often subtly critical or dismissive of other people in our social circle. Most importantly, I've learned that my worth as a partner and friend isn't determined by someone else's opinion of me, even if that someone claims to know me better than I know myself. Tom and I moved in together 3 months ago, and it's been wonderful. We've created a home that feels safe and peaceful, filled with inside jokes and shared routines that make me smile every day. He's met my family and they adore him. My sister has told me repeatedly how different I seem now. More confident, more relaxed, more like the person she remembered from before I met Melissa. You were always walking on eggshells, she told me recently, like you were afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing. Now you just seem free. I've also been more successful at work over the past year. Without the constant relationship drama and emotional turmoil that Melissa had been creating in my life, I've been able to focus more clearly on my career goals. I got a promotion 6 months ago and have been taking on more leadership responsibilities. My art has improved dramatically too. I've been painting more regularly and have even sold a few pieces at local art fairs. Tom has been incredibly supportive of my creative pursuits and has helped me set up a proper studio space in our apartment. Through mutual friends, I've heard occasional updates about about Melissa's life. Apparently, she's been struggling to maintain friendships and has developed a reputation for being dramatic and untrustworthy. Several people from our old social circle have distanced themselves from her after witnessing her behavior during our friendship breakdown. She's also gone through a series of short-lived romantic relationships, which makes me wonder if she's been applying her manipulative tactics to her own dating life with predictably poor results. Part of me feels a tiny bit of satisfaction knowing that her toxic behavior has finally caught up with her, but mostly I just feel sad for anyone who gets drawn into her web of manipulation in the future. I've occasionally wondered if I should try to warn people about her, but Dr. Sarah has advised against it. Focus on your own healing and growth, she's told me. Melissa's future victims will have to figure out her true nature for themselves, just like you did. 8 months ago, I thought I was unlucky in love and bad at relationships. I thought I had some fundamental character flaw that drove men away and made me destined to be alone. Today, I know the truth. I was never the problem. I was a victim of systematic psychological manipulation by someone I trusted completely. This experience has been traumatic and painful, but it's also been oddly liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I'm in a relationship that's based on honesty and mutual respect. I have friends who genuinely support my happiness rather than secretly undermining it. I trust my own judgment and don't need someone else's approval to feel good about my choices. If you're reading this and something feels familiar, if you have a friend who always seems to have concerns about your relationships, who's always there to comfort you when things go wrong, who seems to know more about your love life than you do, please consider the possibility that they might not have your best interests at heart. Real friends want you to be happy. They celebrate your successes in love and life, rather than finding reasons to worry or criticize. They support your relationships instead of looking for problems in them. If someone in your life is consistently negative about your romantic prospects, if they always seem to have inside information about your partner's supposed red flags, if they're quick to comfort you when relationships fail but seem less enthusiastic when things are going well, pay attention to those red flags. Trust your instincts. Trust your partner's words and actions rather than someone else's interpretation of them. And remember that you deserve friends who genuinely want the best for you, not people who benefit from keeping you isolated and dependent. I lost 8 years of my life to Melissa's manipulation, but I'm not going to lose any more time dwelling on what might have been. I'm focused on building a future with people who truly love and support me, and I've never been happier. To anyone who's been through something similar, you're not stupid for trusting someone who claimed to care about you. You're not weak for being manipulated by someone who is skilled at deception, and you're not broken or unlovable just because someone convinced you that you were. You deserve real love, real friendship, and real happiness. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.